He was a self-made millionaire with a billion-dollar company. She was his graceful, pregnant wife, lovingly building a sanctuary for their unborn daughter. Their life seemed perfect, but perfect lives often hide the darkest secrets. When her husband's obsessive mistress decides to burn their world to the ground, she starts with the nursery. He expected his wife to shatter. He expected tears. What he didn't expect was for a titan of industry to rise from the ashes. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's the story of how one woman's pain built an empire. The scent of fresh paint, a soft, chalky whisper of Robin's egg blue, was the first thing Adrian Thorne noticed when he came home. It was the smell of his new life, the one he'd meticulously constructed, brick by gold-plated brick. At 34, Adrian was the kind of man magazines write about. His company, Thorne Dynamics, had revolutionized data security, earning him a fortune that was both staggering and, in his mind, thoroughly deserved. His penthouse, a glass-walled marvel overlooking Central Park, was a testament to that success. But none of it, not the Italian marble under his feet, nor the panoramic view of the city that bowed at his throne, compared to the source of that paint smell. He walked past the cavernous living room with its minimalist furniture and abstract art and headed down the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, he saw his wife, Serafina. Serafina Sinclair Hayes was, by any measure, his greatest acquisition and his most profound joy. With hair the color of warm honey and eyes that held the calm depth of a forest lake, she was grace personified. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying their first child, a daughter they had already named Clara. Her belly was a perfect taut globe under her simple white linen dress, and as she stood on a small stepladder, adding a final delicate leaf to a hand-painted tree on the wall, she looked like a goddess tending to a new world. This room was her masterpiece, the nursery. For 3 months, Serafina had poured every ounce of her being into it. She hadn't hired a designer, despite Adrian's insistence. "No, this is for me," she had said, her voice soft but firm. "This is for her. It needs to have my hands on it." And it did. The mural on the main wall was a whimsical forest scene, with the aforementioned tree as its centerpiece. Its branches, painted in shimmering silver, stretched towards the ceiling, where tiny, twinkling fiber-optic lights were embedded like stars. A custom-built crib of pale, polished birchwood sat in the center of the room, a plush, hand-knitted cashmere blanket draped over its side, a gift from Serafina's mother in Vermont. Floating shelves held a curated collection of classic children's books, their spines a rainbow of color. Everything was soft, safe, and filled with a palpable sense of love. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, a genuine, unguarded smile gracing his lips. This was real. His empire, his legacy, was taking root right here, in this room. "It's perfect, Sarah," he said, his voice startling her. She turned, a streak of silver paint on her cheek. Her smile when she saw him was radiant. "Aid, you're home early. Couldn't stay away." He walked in, his expensive suit suddenly feeling coarse and out of place in the room's gentle atmosphere. He gently took the paintbrush from her hand and helped her down from the ladder. "You should be resting," the doctor said. "The doctor said to avoid stress, not to stop living," she countered, leaning into his embrace. She rested her head against his chest, her hand protectively cradling her stomach. "I'm fine. Clara is fine. She kicks every time I paint a new animal." Adrian kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair mixed with the faint aroma of turpentine and paint. "She's got her mother's artistic flair." He looked around the room again, a sense of overwhelming pride swelling within him. "When my father was starting out, I slept in a drawer, a literal drawer. And look at this. Our daughter will sleep under the stars. She will have everything she needs," Serafina whispered, her focus on the love, not the luxury. "That's all that matters." He held her tighter, He loved this woman with a ferocity that sometimes scared him. He loved her quiet strength, her unwavering moral compass that came from a simpler, less cynical upbringing than his own. She was his anchor, the calm harbor to his relentless ambition, which was why the lie felt like a shard of glass lodged in his throat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A single sharp vibration. Serafina felt it. She shifted slightly in his arms, a flicker of something. Not suspicion, but perhaps weariness in her eyes. Is that the office? Adrian's smile became a mask. It's always the office. He pulled the phone out, his thumb hovering over the screen. The name was blocked, but he knew the number. He knew the sender. Maya. The message was simple, demanding. Where are you? You promised. He quickly typed back, his body angled away from Serafina. Busy. Tomorrow. Everything okay? Serafina asked, her voice still soft. Just a supply chain issue in Singapore. Nothing I can't handle, he lied, the words tasting like ash. He slid the phone back into his pocket. The lie was a necessary evil, he told himself. A compartment. Maya Reed was a dalliance, a mistake born of ego and opportunity, a fiery, beautiful distraction who worked in the marketing department of a company he'd acquired. It was supposed to be a fling, a meaningless release from the pressures of his world. But Maya had other ideas. She had become persistent, clingy, demanding. Serafina, in her trusting innocence, knew nothing. And Adrian intended to keep it that way. He was a master of control. He controlled his company, his investments, his life. He could control this. He would end it with Maya soon. Once the baby was born, he'd be a family man, completely and utterly. The compartment would be sealed shut, forever. Forget the office, he said, forcing a bright tone. He turned Serafina to face him, framing her face with his hands. Tonight is about us. It's about this. He gestured to the beautiful room. Let me take you to dinner, per se. I'll make a call. Serafina hesitated. I don't know, Ade. I'm a little tired. And I wanted to organize her clothes. Nonsense, he insisted, his charm a powerful weapon. You've done enough. Let me spoil you. Let me spoil my two girls. She finally relented, her love for him overriding her fatigue. Okay, she smiled. But I'm not wearing heels. You could show up in slippers, and you'd still be the most beautiful woman in the room, he said. And in that moment, he meant it. As they left the nursery, Serafina gently pulled the door closed, leaving the sanctuary to bask in the soft glow of the twilight filtering through the window. It was a perfect, pristine bubble of hope, but bubbles, by their very nature, are fragile. And somewhere across town, in a chic Soho loft, a woman named Maya Reed was staring at her phone, her beautiful face contorted into a mask of rage. Busy. Tomorrow. The words mocked her. She knew about the wife. She even knew about the pregnancy. A fact Adrian had let slip in a moment of weakness. A fact that had ignited a firestorm of jealousy within her. She scrolled through Adrian's public social media, a curated feed of business triumphs and philanthropic galas. Then she found Serafina's profile. It was private, but the profile picture was public. It was a photo of her and Adrian, taken a few months ago. She was glowing, her hand on her just starting to show belly. Maya's nails dug into the palm of her hand. She had given him the best months of her life, she thought, her logic twisted by obsession. She understood him, his ambition, his darkness, in a way that perfect Serafina never could. He was supposed to leave her. That was the promise she had invented for herself, a fantasy she clung to with rabid desperation. This nursery, this baby, they weren't just a part of his life. They were a threat to hers, an obstacle that needed to be removed. Her mind started racing, connecting dots Adrian had carelessly left behind. He'd mentioned the address of the penthouse once, boasting. He talked about the extensive renovations. He'd even complained jokingly about the smell of paint. A dangerous, venomous idea began to form in her mind. An idea born of a desperate need to not be erased, to prove that she was a real part of his life, not just a secret hidden in a phone. She wouldn't be compartmentalized. She would tear the walls down. Starting with the nursery, Maya Reed was not just a woman scorned, she was a student of her obsession. For weeks, she had been collecting the scattered puzzle pieces of Adrian Thorne's life, a casual mention of the building's over-reliance on a new, glitchy digital concierge system, a complaint about the specific brand of gourmet groceries they had delivered every Tuesday, a boast about the private elevator that opened directly into their penthouse, a feature he thought made him untouchable. On Tuesday night, while Adrian and Serafina were dining at Per Se, Maya put her knowledge into action. Dressed in a nondescript black jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, she approached the service entrance of the opulent building. She carried a large, insulated grocery delivery bag from Artisan Farms, the very service Adrian used. "Delivery for Thorne, Penthouse A," she said to the security guard, her voice flat and professional. She held up a tablet displaying a forged order confirmation, complete with Serafina's name. The guard, a burly man named George who recognized the delivery service, barely glanced at her. "Go on up. You know the protocol. Leave it inside the service door." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a placid mask. She knew the protocol because Adrian had complained about it. The private elevator had a service alcove, a small, unsecured space between the elevator door and the apartment's actual service entrance, where deliveries were to be left. A blind spot, a flaw in the fortress. Once the elevator doors whispered shut, sealing her in the polished steel cocoon, she was alone. She rode it to the top floor. The doors opened not into the penthouse, but into the small, gray-painted alcove Adrian had described. To her right was the main service door to the apartment. She pulled a thin, flexible piece of metal from her pocket, the kind used by locksmiths. Adrian had once drunkenly lamented how he'd had to have a specialist open this very door after a lock malfunction. He'd described the process in fascinated detail. It took Maya less than 2 minutes. The lock clicked open with a sickeningly soft sound. She slipped inside. The penthouse was silent, vast and dark, save for the glittering city lights that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't interested in the art, the marble, or the designer furniture. Guided by an internal compass of pure venom, she moved down the hallway, her sneakers silent on the expensive rugs. She found the nursery door, closed but not locked. The moment she stepped inside, the room's purity felt like an assault. It was so full of hope, so cloyingly perfect. It was everything she wasn't, everything she'd been denied. The whimsical forest, the starry ceiling, the little birchwood crib. It was a monument to her replacement. A cold, methodical rage took over. She didn't scream or smash things wildly. Her destruction was precise, intimate, and cruel. From her bag, she pulled not groceries, but cans of spray paint. Black and a vicious blood red. The first slash of black paint went across the hand-painted mural. She drew a jagged, ugly line through the silver tree, obliterating the gentle animals nestled at its roots. Then she turned to the walls, her movements sharp and angry. The robin's egg blue was soon covered in scrawled, hateful words. Liar. Whore. Homewrecker. The irony was lost on her. She approached the crib. For a moment, she stared at the soft cashmere blanket. It was so innocent. She snatched it, threw it to the floor, and stomped on it with her dirty shoes. Then, with a grunt of effort, she tipped the crib over. It landed with a sharp crack, one of its delicate legs splintering. The sound was deeply satisfying. She tore the books from the shelves, ripping pages from their spines, scattering them like confetti. But her final act was the most deliberate. She took out a tube of her signature lipstick, a deep vampiric shade called Femme Fatale that Adrian had once said he loved. She walked to the one remaining clean space on the wall, right above where the crib had been, and drew a crude, mocking heart. Inside it, she wrote a single word. "Adrian?" Then, she uncapped a small bottle of perfume, also a favorite of his, and sprayed it liberally throughout the room, tainting the air with the scent of their affair. It was her mark, her claim. She was here. She was real. She slipped out as silently as she had entered, leaving the sanctuary a war zone. An hour later, Adrian and Serafina returned. The dinner had been a success. Adrian had been attentive, charming, and apologetic about his recent distraction. Serafina, feeling cherished, had allowed herself to relax completely. They walked out of the elevator into their apartment, arms linked, her head resting on his shoulder. "I'm so full," she laughed softly. "Clara is doing somersaults. I think she liked the truffle risotto." "She has expensive taste, just like her mother," Adrian said, kissing her temple. As they passed the hallway, Serafina noticed it first. The nursery door was ajar, and a strange, acrid smell, sharp chemicals and a cloying floral scent, leaked out. "What's that smell?" she asked, pulling away from him. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She walked towards the door, pushing it open. The scream that left her throat was not loud. It was a strangled, horrified gasp, all the air sucked from her lungs. She swayed, one hand flying to her mouth, the other clutching her belly as if to shield her unborn child from the sight. Adrian rushed to her side, his mind initially processing it as a fire or a break-in. "Sarah, what is it?" Then he saw it. The world tilted on its axis. The black and red graffiti. The overturned crib, broken like a wounded animal. The shredded books. The filth. It was a scene of such violation, such personal hatred, that it took his breath away. But it was the smell that hit him like a physical blow. That perfume. He knew that perfume. It was Maya's. "Oh my God!" he breathed, the blood draining from his face. Guilt, hot and suffocating, washed over him. This was his fault. He had brought this plague into his home. Serafina stumbled into the room, her bare feet crunching on the torn pages of what was once Goodnight Moon. She knelt, her hands shaking, and picked up the soiled, footprint-marked cashmere blanket her mother had knitted. A sob, raw and ragged, finally broke from her. She held the ruined blanket to her chest, rocking back and forth, her eyes scanning the devastation. "Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Who could be so full of hate?" Adrian couldn't speak. His tongue was a lead weight in his mouth. He wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but he felt like a leper. His touch was poison. He had done this. Serafina's gaze drifted from the broken crib to the defaced mural, and finally, to the wall above. She saw the lurid red heart, a grotesque parody of love, and the name inside it. "Adrian!" Her sobbing stopped. The blood-red lipstick. The name. The perfume that now seemed to be choking her. It all coalesced into a single horrifying point of clarity. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was a message. And the sender knew her husband. Intimately, she slowly got to her feet, the ruined blanket falling from her hands. She turned to look at Adrian. Her beautiful Forest Lake eyes, which had always held such love and trust for him, were now frozen over. The warmth was gone, replaced by an Arctic chill that terrified him more than any scream or accusation could. "Adrian," she said, and her voice was unnervingly calm, stripped of all emotion. "Who is Maya?" The name hung in the air between them, more toxic than the spray paint fumes. Maya. It was a name Adrian had only ever uttered in hushed tones over the phone or whispered in a bed that was not his own. To hear it from Serafina's lips, in this desecrated space, was like hearing his own death sentence read aloud. "How do you know that name?" he stammered, the question itself an admission of guilt. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, was a maelstrom of panic. He could see the crumbling ruins of his perfect life, and he was standing right at the epicenter. Serafina didn't answer his question. She didn't need to. Her gaze was fixed on him, her eyes like chips of ice. The calm she was exhibiting was far more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision, precise and devoid of emotion. "She works for you, doesn't she?" Serafina stated, not asked. "At one of the companies you acquired. Reed. Maya Reed. Marketing." Adrian stared at her, dumbfounded. How? When a woman is 7 months pregnant and her husband starts working late 5 nights a week, when he starts guarding his phone like it's the crown jewels, she doesn't just sit and knit booties, Adrian, Serafina said, her voice still unnervingly level. "She pays attention. I saw the emails on your laptop a month ago. I saw the hotel receipts you thought you'd buried in your expense reports. I saw the name." She took a step towards him, her hand still protectively on her belly. "I told myself it was nothing. A flirtation? A stupid, egotistical mistake that you would end. I gave you the benefit of the doubt because I loved you. Because I believed in the man I married. I thought you would never, ever let it touch our home. Let it touch her." Her voice finally cracked on the last word, a single fissure in her icy composure. The dam of Adrian's denial broke. A torrent of pathetic, panicked words spilled out. "Sarah, I am so sorry. It was a mistake. It meant nothing, I swear. It was just an escape. The pressure. The company. It's over. I ended it. I was going to tell you everything after Clara was born. I can fix this. I'll have this room redone, better than before. I'll call security, the police. We'll have her arrested. I'll protect you. I'll protect our family." He reached for her, his hands outstretched in a desperate plea. Serafina flinched back as if he were white-hot iron. "Fix this?" she repeated, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "You think this is about paint and a broken crib? You think you can just buy your way out of this betrayal?" She swept her arm around the room, at the hateful words, the shredded pages of stories she'd dreamed of reading to her daughter. "This isn't just a room, Adrian. This was a promise. It was the one safe place in the world for our child. And you led the monster right to the door." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his ego, his excuses, his carefully constructed reality. "She did this because of you," Serafina continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, each word laden with contempt. "This level of hatred isn't about me. She doesn't know me. This is about you, your promises, your lies. This is your filth, Adrian, and you tracked it all over our daughter's future." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren on the streets below, a fitting soundtrack to the emergency unfolding in their lives. Adrian Thorne, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single phone call, was utterly powerless. He had no counteroffer, no strategy, no leverage. He had already lost everything that mattered. Serafina turned her back on him, her posture ramrod straight. She walked out of the ruined nursery without a second glance. Adrian stood frozen, listening to her footsteps as she walked down the hall to their master bedroom. He heard the quiet, efficient sounds of a suitcase being opened, of drawers sliding, of hangers being removed from the closet. He finally stumbled after her, his legs feeling like lead. He found her in their walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. She was calmly folding her simple, elegant clothes into a single leather weekender bag. She wasn't taking much. "Sarah, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can go to a hotel. We can go to the Hamptons. Just don't leave. We can talk about this. We can see a therapist." She zipped the bag shut with a final, definitive sound. She turned to face him, her car keys in her hand. "There is nothing to talk about. You made your choice. The woman I was. The one who would have cried and screamed and maybe eventually forgiven you. She died in that nursery tonight. You are looking at who is left. Where will you go? He asked, a new wave of panic hitting him. To your mother's? A flicker of something that might have been pity crossed her face. No, I would never burden my mother with your failure. She walked past him, heading for the private elevator. On her way, she paused at the entrance to the nursery. Adrian's heart leaped with a sliver of false hope. Was she reconsidering? Serafina stepped carefully over the debris on the floor. Her eyes scanned the room one last time, not with sadness, but with a strange, detached assessment. She bent down and picked up one small, seemingly insignificant object from the floor. A single, undamaged wooden block. It was from a set she had ordered from a small, independent toy maker in Oregon. On its face was a beautifully carved letter, C for Clara. She closed her fingers around the block, its hard edges digging into her palm. It was a tangible piece of the dream, the only part that hadn't been defiled. She slipped it into her coat pocket. She turned and walked to the elevator, not looking back. Adrian followed, a desperate trailing shadow. Serafina, please, he whispered as the elevator doors opened. I love you. She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and cold as glass. No, Adrian. You loved the idea of me. You loved what I represented. A perfect wife, a perfect family, another asset in your portfolio. But you don't get to have it all. Not anymore. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Adrian alone in the silent, cavernous penthouse that now felt like a tomb. The lingering scent of Maya's perfume was his only companion. Serafina did not drive to a hotel. She did not drive to a friend's apartment. She drove for 2 hours, heading north out of the city. The rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement a soothing mantra. She was operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The grief was there, a vast black ocean beneath the surface, but she refused to let it pull her under. Not yet. First, there was work to do. She pulled into the parking lot of a sterile, anonymous airport hotel. She checked in under her maiden name, Sinclair, paying with a credit card Adrian knew nothing about, one linked to a private account she'd maintained since before they were married. Inside the quiet room, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally pulled the wooden C block from her pocket. She stared at it, her thumb tracing the smooth, carved letter. This was all that was left of the sanctuary, but she wasn't going to mourn it. She was going to rebuild it. She pulled out her phone and opened a web browser. She bypassed the news sites and social media, going directly to a business listings page she had bookmarked weeks ago. Her fingers, steady and sure, typed in a search. A listing appeared on the screen. It was for a small, charming children's boutique in a wealthy suburb not far from the city. It was called The Gilded Stork. It sold high-end baby furniture, organic clothing, and unique handcrafted toys, including the very block set she now held in her hand. The listing mentioned the owners were retiring and looking for a quick, uncomplicated sale. Serafina stared at the picture of the shop's front window, with its warm, inviting glow. An idea, born not of revenge, but of reclamation, had been quietly forming in her mind for the past hour. If her sanctuary had been destroyed, she would not just rebuild it. She would buy the source. She would create a fortress of her own. Her finger hovered over the phone number for the commercial real estate agent listed. The rage and the pain were still there. But now they were being channeled, refined, and forged into a weapon. A purpose. She pressed call. "Hello?" she said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Serafina Sinclair. I'm calling about the listing for the Gilded Stork. I'd like to make an offer." While Serafina was laying the first brick of her new life, Adrian was drowning in the wreckage of his old one. The penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, had become his prison. The scent of Maya's perfume clung to the air like a ghost, a constant cloying reminder of his catastrophic failure. His first instinct was to deploy his usual arsenal: money and power. He called his head of security, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Ronan, and ordered a full forensic sweep of the nursery. "Find out who did this, and find out now," he snarled, conveniently omitting his own certainty about the culprit. He then called his legal team, instructing them to find Serafina, to track her credit cards, to do whatever it took. He needed to get to her, to explain, to manage the situation. But for the first time, his power was useless. Serafina had vanished. Her cards were inactive. Her phone went straight to a disconnected message. She had severed herself from his grid. The realization that she had the foresight and the means to do so was a fresh, chilling shock. His next call was the one he dreaded most. He summoned Maya to his office, a sterile glass and steel box high above Manhattan. She arrived not with remorse, but with a triumphant, possessive gleam in her eyes. "I knew you'd call," she said, gliding towards his desk as if she belonged there. "She's gone, isn't she? I told you she was weak. Now we can finally be together, Adrian. The way it was, always meant to be." Adrian stared at her, and for the first time, he saw her not as a seductive escape, but as she truly was. A volatile, delusional arsonist who had just burned his entire world to the ground. "Get out," he said, his voice low and shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it could split him in two. Maya's smile faltered. "What? Adrian, I did this for us." "There is no us," he spat, rising from his chair. "There is a restraining order, which my lawyers are filing as we speak. You will not come within 500 feet of me, my wife, or any of my properties. If you do, you will be arrested. Your employment is terminated. Your access to this building is revoked. You are nothing to me." The color drained from her face, replaced by a mask of disbelief, then fury. "You can't do this, after everything. You love me, Adrian, you said—" "I said a lot of things," he roared, slamming his hands on the desk. "It was a lie, a game, and you took it and you destroyed my family. You are a cancer, and I am cutting you out. Now get out of my sight before I have security drag you out." Maya stared at him, her chest heaving. The love in her eyes curdled into pure, unadulterated hatred. "You will regret this, Adrian Thorne," she hissed. "You think you can just throw me away? You have no idea what I'm capable of." She stormed out, leaving a vibrating silence in her wake. Adrian collapsed into his chair, the adrenaline leaving him hollow. He had put out one fire, but he knew, with a sickening certainty, that the embers were still glowing. 2 days later, Serafina Sinclair stood on the charming cobblestone sidewalk of Greenwich, Connecticut. She was meeting with the real estate agent, a pleasant woman named Brenda. The Gilded Stork was even more perfect in person. It had large bay windows, a cheerful blue awning, and an air of established, quiet luxury. "The owners are very motivated," Brenda said, unlocking the front door. "They've had a few offers, but they're looking for someone who will, as they say, cherish the business." Serafina stepped inside. The store smelled of lavender potpourri and new cotton. It was filled with beautiful things, tiny cashmere sweaters, hand-carved wooden animals, and elegant bassinets that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. It was a sanctuary, whole and untouched. "I'll take it," Serafina said, her voice firm. Brenda blinked. "Well, that's wonderful. We can draw up an offer. I'd suggest starting at—" "I'm not making an offer," Serafina interrupted gently. "I am meeting their asking price, in full, all cash. I can have the funds transferred from my trust by the end of the day. My only condition is that we close by the end of the week." Brenda's jaw went slack. In her 20 years in real estate, she had never seen a deal move this fast. She was looking at a woman who was not just buying a store, she was seizing a future. The account Serafina referred to was her own. A substantial trust fund left to her by her grandparents, which her father, a shrewd and practical man, had insisted she never merge with Adrian's finances. "Always have your own lifeboat," he'd told her. Adrian had known about it, of course, but had dismissed it as pocket money. He had severely underestimated her. By Friday, the Gilded Stork belonged to Serafina Sinclair. She spent the weekend not in a hotel, but in the small, sun-drenched two-bedroom apartment above the shop, which had been part of the sale. It was simple, with hardwood floors and cozy window nook seats. After the cold, cavernous emptiness of the penthouse, it felt like a real home. She unpacked her single bag, placing the wooden C block on the mantelpiece. She ordered groceries, bought a new set of simple white sheets, and for the first time in months, she slept through the night. The next week was a blur of activity. Serafina, drawing on a business acumen Adrian never knew she possessed, dove headfirst into her new role. She met with suppliers, reviewed the inventory, and hired a local contractor to do a minor refresh. New paint, updated lighting. The existing staff, a small team of warm, competent women, were initially wary of their new, mysterious boss. But they were quickly won over by her quiet confidence, her clear vision, and her genuine passion for the products. She wasn't playing shop. She was building an empire. Meanwhile, Adrian was losing his mind. His lawyers had finally located her, not through any digital trace, but through the massive multi-million-dollar wire transfer from her trust. When his lawyer, a slick corporate shark named Donovan, told him the news, Adrian was baffled. She bought a what? A baby store? He asked, incredulous. In Greenwich? Seems so, Donovan said. Paid cash. The LLC is registered under her maiden name. A wave of relief, followed by a patronizing sense of understanding, washed over Adrian. Of course, it was a hobby, a distraction to cope with the trauma. She was nesting, but on a commercial scale. She was hurt and acting out, and she needed him to come and rescue her from her own folly. He got in his car and drove to Greenwich. He found the store easily. He saw her through the large front window, and his heart ached. She was talking to a man in a dusty work jacket, pointing at the ceiling, her pregnant form silhouetted by the warm light of the shop. She looked small, vulnerable. She needed him. He strode in, the little bell on the door announcing his arrival with a cheerful jingle that was jarringly at odds with his mood. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, conciliatory. Serafina turned. The contractor beside her excused himself. She looked at Adrian, and there was no surprise in her eyes. No fear. No sadness. There was nothing but a cool, professional distance. "Adrian," she said, her tone polite but firm. "This is a private place of business. What can I help you with?" The question threw him. "What?" "Sarah, it's me. I came to see if you're okay, to take you home. This is a sweet little hobby, but you don't have to do this. I can fix everything. Just come home." Serafina gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "First, I am not your Sarah anymore. You may call me Serafina. Second, this is not a hobby. This is my company. And third, you seem to be under the impression that you are still welcome in my life. You are not." She walked from behind the counter, her presence filling the space. She was not the soft, yielding woman he had married. She was a CEO in her own domain. "I know you're hurting," he pleaded, taking a step forward. "Let me help you." "You want to help me?" she said, stopping him with a raised hand. "Then leave. Leave. And do not come back. My lawyer will be in touch with yours regarding the divorce proceedings. Any and all communication will go through them. Is that clear?" Adrian was speechless. He looked around at the shop, at the tiny dresses and soft toys, and finally understood. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a declaration of independence. This was her fortress, and he was not allowed inside. "Serafina," he started, his voice desperate. "Goodbye, Adrian," she said, turning her back on him and walking towards the back office. "Please close the door on your way out. Don't want to let the cold in." Adrian drove back to Manhattan in a daze, the cheerful jingle of the shop's bell echoing in his ears like a death knell. The woman he had seen was not his Serafina. His Serafina was soft, gentle, a painter of whimsical forests. This woman was forged from steel, a CEO who had just executed a hostile takeover of her own life. The realization that he had created this new, formidable person was a bitter pill to swallow. He had broken his most prized possession, and the pieces had reassembled themselves into something he could no longer control or even comprehend. His world began to shrink. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum for a life that had died. The divorce proceedings began, and they were as brutal as he had feared. Serafina's lawyer, a woman named Camila Reyes, who had a reputation for being a shark with a conscience, was relentless. She didn't want his money. Serafina had her own. She wanted his accountability. Every lie, every hotel receipt, every text message he had tried to delete was laid bare in sterile legal documents. It was a systematic dismantling of his character. Meanwhile, Serafina's world was expanding. The gilded stork, under her meticulous guidance, flourished. She had an innate understanding of her clientele because she was her clientele. She knew they wanted quality, exclusivity, and a story. She began hosting small, intimate events: prenatal yoga mornings, lactation consultant meet and greets, story time for toddlers. The store became more than a shop. It became a community hub for affluent mothers in the tri-state area. 2 months after their confrontation, Serafina gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Clara, just as they had always planned. She sent Adrian a single, formal email via her lawyer with the birth announcement attached. No personal note, no picture. The news of his daughter's birth sent Adrian into a fresh spiral of despair. He was a father, yet he was not. He begged for visitation, and Serafina, through her lawyer, granted it under strict conditions. 2 hours, every other Saturday, at the apartment above the shop, and only with a court-appointed supervisor present. His first visit was the most humbling experience of his life. He walked into the sunny, modest apartment, a space that felt more like a home than his penthouse ever had, and saw Serafina holding their daughter. Clara was so small, so perfect, with a dusting of honey-colored hair like her mother's. Serafina looked tired but radiant, her transformation into a mother complete. She handed him the baby with a cool, detached professionalism, as if he were a distant relative she was obligated to entertain. Holding Clara, Adrian finally broke. The tears he had held back for months streamed down his face. He looked at this tiny, innocent life, and the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on him. He had forfeited this. He had traded the right to rock his daughter to sleep for a series of sordid, meaningless encounters in hotel rooms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with tears, not to Serafina, but to the baby in his arms. Serafina watched him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. Maya Reed had not disappeared. She had been stewing, her obsession curdling into a venomous need for revenge. The restraining order kept her from Adrian, but it couldn't stop her from watching. She saw the articles in local Greenwich papers celebrating the inspiring new owner of the Gilded Stork. She saw the glowing online reviews. She saw Serafina building a new life on the ashes of the one Maya believed was rightfully hers. So she went to war. She began her assault anonymously, from the dark corners of the internet. Fake one-star reviews flooded the store's pages, complaining of rude staff and defective products. A blog, The Gilded Truth, appeared, dedicated to exposing the real Serafina Sinclair. It was a masterpiece of twisted narratives, painting Serafina as a cold, calculating gold digger who had trapped a brilliant man and then feigned victimhood. When that didn't seem to be enough, Maya escalated. She drove to Greenwich, parking across the street from the store. She would watch for hours, her heart pounding with a mixture of hatred and longing. She started taking pictures of the women coming and going from the shop. Pregnant women, mothers with their babies, and posting them on her blog with captions like, "Another victim of Serafina Sinclair's web of lies." The campaign began to have its intended effect. A chill settled over the store. Customers would mention the nasty blog posts. Sales, for the first time, dipped. Serafina's staff grew anxious, constantly looking over their shoulders. The sanctuary was under siege. Serafina knew this wasn't random. This was personal. She hired a private investigator, the same one who had helped her lawyer find evidence for the divorce, who confirmed her suspicions within a day. The digital trail, though cleverly masked, led directly back to Maya Reed. Serafina's first instinct was fear, not for herself, but for Clara. Maya was unhinged, unpredictable. But as she sat in her apartment late one night, rocking her sleeping daughter, the fear hardened into resolve. She would not be intimidated. She would not let this woman poison her new life. She had built this fortress, and she would defend it. She called her PR agent. "I want to do an interview," she said, her voice steady. "A big one. And I want to host an event. A grand relaunch. We're going to turn this into a fundraiser for a charity that supports single mothers." She was going to take Maya's darkness and drag it into the light. Adrian, isolated in his penthouse, saw the attacks online. He read the vile blog posts, his stomach churning. He recognized Maya's obsessive, destructive fingerprints all over it. This was his fault. He had unleashed this monster, and now it was hunting his family. The restraining order was a piece of paper. It couldn't stop a phantom on the internet. A primal, protective instinct he hadn't felt in months surged through him. He had failed as a husband, but he would not fail as a father. He had to stop her. Not with lawyers or security, but personally. He knew her weaknesses, her triggers, her desperate need for his attention. It was a dangerous game, but he was the only one who could play it. He picked up his phone and, for the first time in months, dialed Maya's number. He was breaking the terms of his own restraining order. But he didn't care. She answered on the first ring. "Adrian," she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and triumph. "It's over, Maya," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Meet me tomorrow. We're ending this, once and for all." Adrian chose the meeting place with tactical precision. A windswept, deserted pier in Red Hook, Brooklyn, overlooking the gray, choppy waters of the bay. It was a place of transience, where things arrived and departed, a fitting backdrop for the final severing of a tie. He stood at the edge, the wind whipping at his expensive coat, feeling nothing of the cold. When Maya's car pulled up, he didn't turn. He watched her reflection approach in the dark water. She came to a stop a few feet away from him, her face a mixture of hope and defiance. "You came alone," she said, a hint of her old seductive purr in her voice. "I knew you would." "There's no you and me, Maya," Adrian said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were devoid of any warmth. This was not the man who had whispered secrets to her in the dark. This was the CEO of Thorn Dynamics, a man known for his brutal efficiency. "This is a transaction. I am here to buy your silence." He gestured to his lawyer, Donovan, who had been waiting discreetly in a nearby car. Donovan approached and handed Maya a thick leather-bound folder. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That is a settlement agreement," Adrian explained, his tone flat. "Inside, you will find a cashier's check for $5 million. In return, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive that you will be legally forbidden from ever writing, speaking, or even hinting at my name or my family's name again. You will delete the blog. You will delete every fake review. You will erase every trace of your pathetic little war. You will take the money, and you will disappear." Maya stared at him, her face contorting in disbelief, then rage. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that was snatched by the wind. $5 million? You think you can buy me off? You think my pain, what you did to me, is worth $5 million? I think it's $5 million more than it's worth, Adrian countered coldly. But it's the price I'm willing to pay to have you expunged from my life. I don't want your money, she shrieked, her composure shattering. I want you. I want the life you promised me, and if I can't have it, I'll make damn sure no one can. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I have recordings, Adrian. Hours of them. You, telling me you loved me. You, complaining about Serafina. You, talking about your business deals in ways the SEC would find very interesting. I will send this to every reporter in New York. I will burn you to the ground." Adrian didn't flinch. A flicker of something that looked like pity crossed his face. "I know," he said quietly. "I assumed you would have something like that. It's why I came prepared." He gave a slight nod. From the shadows of the pier, another figure emerged. It was Ronan, his head of security. He wasn't carrying a folder. He was carrying a single manila envelope. He handed it to Maya. "What is this?" she whispered, a real tremor of fear in her voice now. "That," Adrian said, his voice dropping, "is a copy of a sealed juvenile court record from San Diego for a girl named Maya Reed, arrested at 17 for stalking and harassing her high school chemistry teacher after he gave her a B-. It details a pattern of obsession, vandalism of property, and threats that look remarkably similar to your current activities. It also includes the restraining order his wife had to file against you." A wife who was, coincidentally, pregnant at the time. The color drained completely from Maya's face. She looked like she had been struck. "The reporter you send your recordings to will get that envelope 10 minutes later," Adrian continued, pressing his advantage. "So you have a choice. You can be a rich woman who disappears, or you can be a crazy obsessed stalker with a documented history of preying on married men and their pregnant wives. Your story, your recordings, they become worthless. You become a punchline. So what's it going to be, Maya?" Maya stared at the envelope, then at Adrian's merciless face. She was trapped. He had outmaneuvered her at every turn. Defeated, she snatched the pen from Donovan and signed the agreement with a vicious, angry scrawl. She threw the pen on the ground. "I hope she never takes you back," she hissed, her eyes filling with tears of pure hatred. "I hope you die alone in that big, empty apartment." She turned and walked away, a ghost swallowed by the Brooklyn gloom. Adrian watched her go, feeling no sense of victory, only a vast, soul-crushing emptiness. At that exact moment, 50 miles away in Greenwich, the Gilded Stork was a beacon of warmth and light. The store was packed. Soft music played, champagne flutes and sparkling cider clinked, and the air buzzed with supportive energy. Serafina, dressed in a simple but elegant cream-colored dress, stood at a small podium at the front of the store. Little Clara sleeping soundly in a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked out at the sea of friendly faces. Journalists from parenting magazines, influential bloggers, loyal customers, and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and steady. "When I bought this store, I wanted to create more than just a place to buy beautiful things. I wanted to create a sanctuary. A place where mothers and mothers-to-be could feel supported, celebrated, and safe." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Recently, that sense of safety has been challenged. Many of you are aware of an anonymous online campaign of harassment directed at this store, and at me personally. It has been ugly, and it has been hurtful. And the easiest thing to do would be to ignore it, to hide. But as mothers, we teach our children not to bow to bullies. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "This campaign was born of darkness and negativity," Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength. "And the only way to fight darkness is with light. That is why, tonight, I am officially launching the Gilded Stork Foundation. A portion of every single sale from this day forward will go directly to funding charities that support single mothers who have escaped abusive situations. We are going to take the poison that was directed at us, and we are going to turn it into a cure for others." The room erupted in applause. It was a masterful move, turning her personal trauma into a public triumph of philanthropy. She hadn't mentioned Maya, hadn't given the attacks any more oxygen. She had simply risen above them, transforming herself from a victim into a champion. As the event wound down and Serafina was accepting congratulations, her lawyer, Camila, quietly showed her a news alert on her phone. It was from a major gossip site. Tech Millionaire's Mistress exposed. A history of stalking and obsession. The article detailed, with brutal clarity, Maya's sealed juvenile record and her recent online harassment campaign. It painted her as a disturbed and predatory figure. Adrian's recordings were mentioned, but framed as the desperate, illegal actions of a spurned lover. Maya Reed had been publicly and professionally annihilated. Serafina looked at the picture of Maya, a grainy, angry-looking photo. And then, around her beautiful store, filled with light and laughter and the promise of a new beginning. The war was over. Adrian had fought his battle with fire and scorched earth. She had fought hers with grace and light. She felt no joy at Maya's demise, only a profound, weary sadness for the wreckage all three of them had created. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, a perfect, innocent soul in the midst of it all, and knew her fight had been the right one. She hadn't just built a business. She had built a legacy of strength her daughter could one day be proud of. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Part 7. The Long Thaw. The news of Maya's public downfall brought Adrian no satisfaction. It was a hollow victory, a scorched earth tactic that left him feeling as barren as the landscape he had created. He saw the articles celebrating Serafina's foundation, her grace, her strength. He had fought his war with money and threats. She had fought hers with creativity and compassion. The contrast was a stark, unflattering mirror held up to his own soul. He was truly alone. The penthouse, once his castle, was now just a vast, empty space that echoed with his failures. He understood now that he couldn't buy his way back into Serafina's life. He couldn't force forgiveness or manage his way out of the emotional wreckage. The only path forward was through penance, a long, quiet road with no guaranteed destination. His atonement began with 2 hours every other Saturday. He arrived for his supervised visits with Clara on time, every time. He came alone, without lawyers or assistants. He left his ego and his phone in the car. In the sun-filled apartment above the shop, under the watchful eye of the court-appointed supervisor, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Finch, he learned to be a father. At first, he was clumsy, all sharp angles and hesitant movements. He, a man who could command a boardroom of sharks, was terrified of holding his own tiny daughter. But he persisted. He learned the specific way Clara liked to be burped. He learned to distinguish her tired cry from her hungry one. He discovered that she had a fascination with his signet ring, her tiny fingers batting at the gold. He would spend the entire 2 hours on the floor with her, building towers of soft blocks, making funny faces, and singing horribly off-key nursery rhymes. He never asked about Serafina. He never complained about the supervision. He never tried to push the boundaries. His focus was solely on the little girl in front of him. And Mrs. Finch, in her weekly reports to Serafina's lawyer, noted this. Mr. Thorne is patient and fully engaged with the child, she wrote. His focus is 100% on Clara's well-being during their time together. Serafina read these reports with a detached curiosity that slowly, over months, softened into something else. She was thriving. The Gilded Stork was a phenomenal success, with plans to open a second location in the Hamptons. Her foundation had already helped dozens of women. She was a respected business owner, a philanthropist, a symbol of resilience. She didn't need Adrian, but on Saturday afternoons, she would sometimes find herself lingering in the stockroom, listening to the sounds filtering down from the apartment above. She would hear Adrian's deep, rumbling voice attempting to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, followed by Clara's delighted giggles. It was a sound that chipped away at the Arctic wall she had built around her heart. She wasn't ready to forgive, but the fiery anger had cooled into a quiet, somber ache. One Saturday, about 8 months after Clara was born, Serafina walked into the apartment during Adrian's visit to grab a file she had left behind. She stopped in the doorway. Adrian was on his hands and knees on the floor, a blanket draped over his back, pretending to be a horse. Clara was shrieking with laughter, crawling after him. He looked up and saw Serafina, and the smile on his face faltered, replaced by a guarded, neutral expression. He immediately, respectfully, sat up. "Serafina," he said, his voice quiet. "Sorry, we were just—" "It's fine," she said, surprised by her own lack of hostility. "Don't stop on my account." She retrieved her file, but instead of leaving immediately, she found herself leaning against the doorframe. "She seems to like your horse impression," Serafina commented, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. It was the first civil, non-logistical sentence she had spoken to him in nearly a year. A flicker of surprise, then gratitude crossed Adrian's face. "She's a tough critic," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Took me weeks to get it right." The exchange was brief, awkward, and ended as quickly as it began. But it was a crack in the ice, a tiny, fragile bridge across a vast, frozen chasm. The long thaw had begun. The approach of Clara's first birthday marked a turning point. A week before the date, Adrian sent a request through the lawyers. It was different from his usual petitions. He wasn't asking for more time or unsupervised visits. He was asking if he could mark the occasion by making a substantial, 7-figure donation to the Gilded Stork Foundation in Clara's name. He wanted to do it publicly, at the store, if Serafina would permit it. The gesture was significant. It was an acknowledgement of her world, her success, her rules. It wasn't an attempt to buy her, but to support what she had built. After consulting with her lawyer, Serafina agreed. On the day of Clara's birthday, Adrian arrived at the store. It was closed to the public, and a few select journalists Serafina trusted were present. He looked different. Less like a predator in a bespoke suit, and more like a man who had been humbled by a long winter. He presented the oversized check to Serafina, a formal and slightly awkward moment. "Thank you, Adrian," she said, her voice sincere. "This will help a lot of people." "It's the least I can do," he replied quietly. After the reporters had left, and as Adrian was preparing to leave, Serafina stopped him. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She led him through the pristine showroom to the back office, a space he had never seen. In the corner, draped in a silk sheet, was a large object. Serafina pulled the sheet away. It was a rocking horse, but it was unlike any other. It was a stunning piece of craftsmanship, carved from pale birchwood, with a flowing mane made of real horsehair and a saddle of soft, worn leather. But it was one detail that made Adrian's breath catch in his throat. One of the rockers, the curved pieces of wood on the bottom, was a slightly different color from the rest. It was darker, older, and he could just make out a faint, familiar grain. "Is that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The leg from Clara's crib," Serafina confirmed, her voice soft. "The one that broke when it was overturned. I couldn't throw it away. So I gave it to a local craftsman. I wanted to take the most broken piece of our past and make it part of her future, a reminder that beautiful things can come from brokenness." Adrian stared at the rocking horse. It was a perfect, powerful metaphor for everything that had happened. He had destroyed something precious, and from the wreckage, Serafina had built something stronger, more beautiful, and more meaningful than he could have ever imagined. It was the final blow to his carefully constructed armor. The sight of that repurposed piece of wood, a symbol of his ultimate failure transformed by her incredible grace, broke him completely. A sob, deep and ragged, tore from his chest. The carefully controlled composure he had maintained for a year shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands, and wept. Not the selfish, panicked tears of a man who had been caught, but the profound, soul-cleansing tears of a man who finally, truly understood the magnitude of what he had done. "I'm sorry," he choked out between sobs, the words muffled by his hands. "Serafina, I am so sorry. Not for the money or the penthouse. I'm sorry for breaking your trust, for taking your love for granted, for hurting you. I am so sorry." It was the apology she had been waiting a year to hear. The real one. Serafina watched him for a long moment. The anger was gone. The ice had melted. In its place was a deep, quiet sadness, but also a sliver of peace. She walked over to him and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a gentle hand on his shaking shoulder. She didn't say, "I forgive you." Some things were too vast for 3 simple words. But later that afternoon, after Adrian had composed himself, they stood together in the middle of the shop. Serafina placed Clara on the floor between them. Clara, wearing a tiny birthday dress, looked at her mother, then at her father. Then, clutching the leg of a display table for balance, she took her first wobbly, uncertain step, and then another. She toddled directly towards the rocking horse, her hands outstretched. Adrian and Serafina watched, standing side by side, not touching, but sharing the same space, the same air, the same breathtaking moment. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a return to the past. It was the quiet, hopeful, and uncertain beginning of something entirely new. A future built not on a foundation of lies, but on hard-won respect, profound remorse, and the enduring, transformative power of a mother's love. The story wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, the next page was blank, waiting for them to write it together. That was the incredible story of Serafina Hayes, a woman who refused to be a victim and instead built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. Adrian's journey shows that true redemption isn't about grand gestures, but about quiet, consistent work and the humility to accept the consequences of your actions. Their story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most broken things can be rebuilt into something even more beautiful and strong. What did you think of Serafina's ultimate revenge? Was it turning her pain into a charity, or was it her ability to find peace on her own terms? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience, drama, and ultimate triumph moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama fiction you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching.